For decades, the United States Navy has been the undisputed ruler of the oceans from below, with the help of its fast attack submarines. There are specifically two things that gave the American fleet that edge. First, they're nuclear-powered, which not only means they can stay submerged for months at a time, but it can also maintain high speeds without ever running out of fuel, which is a huge advantage if you're chasing another submarine. The second advantage is that the US Navy had more attack submarines than any other nation. But both of those advantages are starting to slip away. China's submarine force is growing more quickly than anyone expected. And the thing that made America's fleet of submarines unstoppable, their nuclear power, might be the very reason they're falling behind fast and quietly. In 2025, the US Navy operated 49 fast attack submarines. 60% of those submarines operated in the Pacific and the other 40% in the Atlantic. On the other hand, China operates an estimated 54 to 58 attack submarines in its immediate waters, and that gap is getting much larger fast. The US Navy plans to have a total of 66 attack submarines by 2054. While the Department of Defense expects the Chinese fleet to grow to 80 as early as 2035. I specifically excluded ballistic missile submarines from the equation because they play a completely different role. Attack submarines are like the fighter jets of the submarine force. They operate deep in the enemy territory, and if needed, they use their Mark 48 torpedoes to attack other ships or submarines. These torpedoes don't exactly hit the target, but rather explode under it. This creates a big bubble that breaks the vessel under its own weight. On the other hand, ballistic missile submarines are a deterrence force that spend most of their time in hiding. So in case there was a nuclear attack on US soil, even if all nuclear bombers and ICBM silos had been destroyed, ballistic missile submarines will be available for a retaliatory response. As you can see, in case of a conflict with China, American ballistic missile submarines will not be directly involved. Of course, the United States still maintains an edge when it comes to submarine technology, but there are concerns that China's deepening ties with Russia could erode this as well. The only obvious advantage of the US attack submarines over that of China is that they're nuclear-powered, and the majority of Chinese submarines are not. But diesel-electric submarines have come a long way. Historically, the Achilles heel of diesel-electric submarines have been speed and endurance. Basically, they couldn't go super fast for too long, as they would consume all their diesel fuel. And they had to surface every 2 to 3 days to breathe. Their diesel generators needed air in order to charge the batteries that would run the propulsion system. It was like a ninja that would quietly tiptoe around, but then had to use a puffer to breathe. Not so stealthy. But that was the old generation. Modern diesel-electric submarines are air-independent, which allows them to address the important problem of endurance. For example, some air-independent submarines use electric engines that are powered by fuel cells. These fuel cells use hydrogen and oxygen to produce electricity. What's crazy is that to carry just 3 tons of hydrogen on board, they need a storage device that weighs over 200 tons. But for a good reason. Hydrogen is a very light gas, and even when cooled into liquid form, it takes up about 5 times more space than the same energy from diesel fuel. On a submarine, space is quite valuable, so to save room, these submarines use metal hydride. It's basically when hydrogen bonds with a metal, creating a sort of solid-state hydrogen battery. This saves on space, but adds a lot of weight, which is okay, since weight is much less of an issue for a submarine than volume. This allows modern, air-independent submarines to operate underwater for up to 6 weeks, which is a huge improvement. But that doesn't address the issue of speed. Nuclear-powered attack submarines are still way faster and can maintain that speed as long as they want. The thing is, diesel-electric submarines don't hunt. They ambush. Since they run on battery, they generate virtually no machinery noise, making them even quieter than some nuclear-powered submarines. The Swedish Gotland-class submarine demonstrated its stealth in 2005, when it repeatedly sank multiple ships in the Ronald Reagan Carrier Strike Group during an exercise. Realistically speaking, there are two ways for the United States to keep up with China's fast-growing submarine fleet. One solution might be to leverage large unmanned undersea vehicles, such as Boeing's Orca, Northrop Grumman's Manta Ray, and Anduril's Dive XL. These could be powerful force multipliers, but these technologies are still being developed. Undersea communications is very limited, and autonomous decision-making and firing torpedoes at targets from these unmanned platforms are complex challenges that yet need to be overcome. The other solution is to build diesel-electric submarines, for two reasons. Think about it. Diesel subs can be built without putting more strain on the existing US nuclear submarine shipyards, which are already stretched pretty thin. Many US allies can aid with this procurement. In addition, diesel-electric submarines would be much more affordable. The Navy could buy 4 diesel-electric submarines for the price of one Virginia-class nuclear submarine. The Virginia-class is more powerful, of course, but it cannot be in 4 different places at the same time, and sometimes that's a bigger advantage. Plus, because these submarines are cheaper, they don't need to last for 40 years. Faster design cycles means faster innovation. So the real question is, how come the US Navy is so reluctant to combine diesel-electric subs with its nuclear fleet? Well, that might be due to a hangover from the Cold War. In the first half of the 20th century, the United States used to operate diesel-electric submarines. But in September 1955, the Soviets became the first nation to launch a ballistic missile from a submarine. Even though this was a converted Zulu 4-class diesel submarine, it gave the Soviets the ability to strike US soil with a nuclear warhead, not from an airplane or a ground silo, but from anywhere in the ocean. To combat this, American attack submarines had to race across entire oceans to reach the Soviet patrol zones, and then stay hidden for weeks or months to keep an eye on the Soviets, something that only a nuclear-powered submarine could pull off. This made nuclear propulsion not just a strategic advantage, but an essential requirement for the US government. The thing is, Americans had already revolutionized submarine warfare by commissioning their first nuclear-powered attack submarine in 1954, 1 year prior to the Soviets' first SLBM launch. And from then on, the United States put all their eggs in the nuclear basket. In 1959, USS George Washington became the world's first nuclear-powered ballistic missile submarine. Not only was it nuclear-powered, but it could also launch ballistic missiles while submerged. Between 1959 and 1967, the United States launched 41 nuclear-powered ballistic missile submarines, which were collectively nicknamed 41 for Freedom. And by the time the Soviet Union fell, the entire US Navy's submarine force was nuclear-powered. Because of this history, the US Navy's nuclear submarine force isn't just a fleet. It's an elite community built on decades of pride, precision, and tradition. Reintroducing diesel-electric subs wouldn't just mean new boats. It would mean new schools, new maintenance yards, and a whole new culture. For example, would serving on a diesel sub carry the same prestige? Would those commanders get the same promotions? Let's face it, When a big part of the identity of a submarine force is built around nuclear power, it's hard to go back to batteries, because even though the technology might work, the politics may not.